One comparison that came to me the other day was the phenomenon of the yuppie. The yuppie phenomenon started in the 80s, and it was a sociological term, which was neutral, young, urban professional. So they were living in urban places. They were young, like just got out of college. When college, that whole transition from college to work was really working pretty well. It was like a smooth, sort of built into the system. If you wanted to get into some type of bigger job outside of the trades, maybe at bigger companies, etc., that you would go to college, get a degree. And if you got a degree with good grades and then or knew a couple of people, as it turns out, that was more likely the case. Then you got placed in these firms, and then you had money all of a sudden, and weren't living like a student, so you would splash out a little bit, maybe on yourself, get yourself a new upgrade to your wardrobe, maybe get yourself a BMW convertible, right? A nice apartment. So this group was uh, sociologically interesting for different reasons. Especially, I guess, envy. I mean, it's an envious lifestyle, right? Be young, have money, and be living in a city where you can do some things. But it soon turned into, like, especially as the cultural war started up in earnest, it became a term of derision. Like, oh, you stinky yuppies, you don't have any social sense of social responsibilities. Imagine that, like the have-nots. Just you're not catering to my vindictive type of personality type enough, and you're living a wonderful lifestyle, and I haven't. So you see, have and have-nots. But yeah, yuppies did have sort of a mentality. They were sort of into materialism, status signaling, that type of thing. So that hasn't gone away. But in fact, these universities with their sociological poisoning and contamination have turned them hateful against their own cultures and nations and have them adopted anthropological fabrications in the form of globalism. So it's like young, urban, and hateful use, like use, use all over the place. Signaling ideological conformity more than status. Like they'll go they'll lowball on signaling wealth, even though a lot of them are wealthy because they have luxury beliefs. Which again, you get luxury beliefs. They have the luxury they think to afford beliefs that they really can't afford. Certainly, societies can't afford it. The working class can't afford these horrendous ideas that they have. So, but to get back to the original yuppies were generous. Like, the people, they might have understood that they had some haters, but when they were splashing out, they did not have any ideological axe to grind. The worst thing you encountered was a type of pseudo snobbery. Like, oh, well, you haven't been made a partner yet? You're still an associate? Like little stupid things like that came out of corporate culture, which at the time wasn't that great either, but it wasn't the horrible thing that it's mutated into these days. But yeah, what you basically have is young, urban, hateful people that don't necessarily signal with wealth, they signal with ideology, they signal each other. So what does that do? Well, that isolates them into a little group of little hateful, misguided people that happen to have positions that enable them to pay the rent and maybe travel a little bit. So who cares? Who wants to be around those people? Like, I would have hung out with the yuppie of old. I wouldn't have shared their materialism or shared in it or wanted to be necessarily in the corporate culture anyway. But we definitely could have been sitting across from each other in a cafe, and both of us would have had great times, and there would have been no reason to get into some type of tiff over something. Or if they were out boating and I happened to go by with my kayak, there was no hate between us. There was, hey, how you doing? That type of thing. Very neutral to positive. More positive than neutral. Today it's the opposite. It's like, who's this? What's this person wearing a a hat that I find offensive? Like that type of person. Who in the world would want to have anything to do with these people? Well, nobody would, but that's why they get into the power politics of venue capture and also information capture. Like, they put themselves in front of the camera and berate you. Yuppies weren't doing that. Yuppies were living their lives. They were also working a lot. I mean, they tried to sell the lifestyle more or less, and it didn't always deliver. Especially when you're living, it's not really wise to live above your means or at your means in an economy that's heading into like long-term recession based on strategic miscalculations, to put it mildly. Strategic economic sabotage. Because that's what it sort of turned into, the 90s. That was happening in the 90s. 89 is when the impunistic world, let's call them that, had a crisis of believability with the people that they had enslaved. And it was, they felt, because of the authentically better deal that the West offered. So how do you change that situation if you're not going to better your own deal? Well, you're going to try to better your own deal somehow. But how about by increasing the economic activity? That's one. Now, they manage that in China better than in Russia, but still, Russia today, supermarkets night and day from what they were in the 70s, for example, or the 80s for that matter. So they came up to sort of parity, and now it's just a question of why should there even be democratic institutions when they've sabotaged them, or sabotaged lots of them. Things don't work as fast or well in the free zone, especially when it's not about some type of militaristic betrayal that they fabricated amongst their own kind. Like, wow, okay. Better systems aren't necessarily the ones that survive. Like the great comic store with super curation and amazing collection. The second that the owner of that comic store dies, that stuff just all spreads to the winds. And sometimes it doesn't even do that. You have real dunces surrounding these people that don't even see the value in what the valuable person was doing. And so all of it just, but it doesn't even scatter to the winds. It just stays where it is, stays in boxes and rots away, or disappears, burns down. So, yeah, these assumptions are really annoying. Like, oh yeah, the great movie theater, it's going to survive because it's great. No. First off, the great movie theater is taking away business from a competition that hates its guts because it's got 50 or 30% of the tape because they're so much better. So you have those types of people. Then also think, maybe people have simple people in their simple lives have met people who've had their personalities puff up. Like, have you ever known someone where you were both employees and then they become like assistant manager and then become manager? They totally change their personality, like start going on power trips. Well, essentially, if you take that psychological process on that level and apply it to politics, these people that have been presidents or prime ministers for years, their egos have expanded to a degree of impunity that you just wouldn't understand and don't, because they're on a different level. But guess what? They're gassing out like that isn't good for their decision making processes or their values or their sense of responsibility, specifically, especially for their constituents. So, like, sir, you might want to take this nuclear football to the golf course because there's an imminent threat. And the dude's like, yeah, whatever. Dude, I might have done that in the beginning, but now just you watch it for me. That type of, it's natural. People slack off. They don't take things. They feel like they've won the contest. They just want to bask in their victory. And I don't want to point out any one nation, but you can see this process at work, especially with politicians that have been in way too long. They'll do what they can get away with, and they can get away with a lot. And they got a lot of patronage underneath them, people who are loyal to them because they were part of their rise. So these people turn into yes people, or were yes people from the beginning, which feeds into their egotism because they're not given any kind of checks and balances, really. Now, I'm not saying all leaders are destined to end this way, but by golly, it's common, right? It's vulgar common. It's so commonly vulgarly common, that it's normal. It's actually normal that people get distorted in these ways. And even more so for people that were negatively selected to be incompetent in the role and then have that egotism added on top. It's really impossible to work with people like that. Or again, everything they think they do is successful, but it's not, type thing. You can see this especially like that go in. It's all about dressing up and showing up to a party where they feel important, but all of their positions are stupid and they don't interact with other major power players the way they think they do. See, they have some type of pick-me instinct that gets activated, but it's not about that at all. It's about, for example, showing enough deterrence that they don't decide to commit a mass act of violence, and if they don't think you in your cute royal blue dress are packing enough heat, they might just attempt it. This is the level of people we're dealing with here. This is the most basic level. But if you can put the competent person there, the competent person that also transmits credibility, such as, if this happens, this will happen, and it's very clear, and they don't want that other thing to happen, they won't do what they were thinking about doing. And so peace is maintained. But you get one of these guys, one of these wise guys on the other side, he thinks, you know what, this is their deterrence, it's not credible, let's go for it. You'll have guys like that on the other side. There's been guys that have overestimated their abilities since the beginning of time. Even Ötzi, they found him in a crevasse, right? He thought he could have made it with whatever injuries he had or supplies, or got hit with a bad bout of weather. He died. There we have him. He's preserved because where he died, very preservable for human tissue. So you apply that all across the spectrum of history and society, and you have people willing to make bets with other people's lives. And when they do that, they set off a chain reaction of unforeseen consequences, including nuclear annihilation. So the concept of MAD, for example, was mutual assured destruction, but there's a lot of assumptions that are built into that to make it to work. They have to believe that the threat is credible. If they don't believe you'll push the button, it doesn't work. Then they try it, then you might have to push the button. And that's something nobody wanted. So everyone said, okay, they know that they're going to go if they do this and that. Well, they don't appear to know that now. And the weaker you have people in positions of high responsibility, the more you're conveying that message, even if that's not the message you want to convey. But incompetent people don't see their own incompetence. Otherwise, they'd be skilled. You see? So, but these are highly accomplished people. How could they be so unskillful in these areas? Well, look, nobody's perfect. And they're less than perfect because we have leadership processes at work that aren't really working or haven't for many, many years. So if you look at that as something that leads up to an event, then you see that could be also integrated into a strategy that has also been accelerated and misused against us. So which brings me also back to the young urban hateful people, or youps. Youps. That's also a strategy. Again, Cultural Revolution, Chinese, they attack the youth with hateful ideas to split them off from their elders, split them off from their society, mislead them at their most vulnerable times, rebellious times. They love that time for messing up kids, putting them on the wrong track. So the concept of white monkey and youps combined, effectively working against their long-term strategic interests, which is high civility, high accomplishment, and high levels of social cohesion, trust, and goodwill. These are white monkeys that, again, we didn't think this was a possibility, but it is. They're white monkeys that are basically sabotaging the people running their countries and civilizations every dang day in every dang way that they can. So that absolutely is a big part of culture war, because you have to look at the people who are doing it. Like, who are the people that are training them? So not really giving them the benefit of the doubt to begin with, and if they show their hand in some way or another with some type of fake social cause, that the results are really destructive, but they have idealistic reasons for why they're doing it, then you can study it in the form of a social pathogen, because that's what it is. So then also how it spreads, any platform it's just, think of it as like blood vessels, that they're sending information, but if there's pathogens in the blood vessels, then you need to give yourself some penicillin, because it's reached that level. But the cool thing is things don't happen by accident. Usually there is causality to it. Now, if we come back to the causality of bad thoughts, bad words, bad deeds, you can see we're in the level of bad thoughts, how bad thoughts get formed, how they get applied, how they're implemented. And that is a big part of the information space. Absolutely, it's also cultural space. Bad art, bad ideas, bad people, bad politics, sort of like that. So, but the problem is, of course, the useful idiots that we're dealing with. A lot of them, they could be family members. They could be people you're in a relationship with. They're 90% there, but they're really toxic on 10% of the issues, but not the 10% these youps thing, but it's actually hateful for different reasons. Like the real hatefulness is hating your own people and culture, okay? That's like where the hate starts at home. You've got that type of principle, nobody in the world is going to really accept you. Like you might think that there's some type of international where everyone hates the same things, but when you come right down to it, that's very flimsy belief system. It's not a lot behind it. And so these useful idiots, they also find that out at some point. Like if they ever need support, they find out they don't have it. But that just makes them collateral damage. Like these are the drones, right? So they're the ones that carry the mortars that they're supposed to blow up like invisible enemies with, and then it ends up detonating before they get to their location. So they also die none the wiser than they lived, which was none the wiser. But of course, they can do damage on their way down. Why is your car window broken this morning? Well, the person who attacked his own culture and then ended up basically attacking everybody, and then finally got ostracized. That person now needs to eat somehow. So if he can sell your $500 navigation system for $100, he's got enough for a couple days. So that business model works for him. Now, how many times is that going to happen until something worse happens to this person? Who knows? Depends on the place. Argentina, for example, they got a lot more of that going on. How about this? If things get so bad, they start stripping out the wires for the metal value. So imagine you have like a high-tech scientific compound where you've got healthy, wholesome, balanced, well-informed people working in unison to make great things happen. And then electricity goes out. Somebody goes out to the back, and there's a mad person ripping the copper wires off the side of the building. The other mad person got electrocuted in the process, and another mad person is running away. So that's sort of like the discrepancies we can start having in times like this, and actually we already do. Which brings me also back to feedback culture. Look, let's build feedback culture, but a curated one that has some awareness of these social pathogens, filters them out, but focuses really on what is happening. So who's this mayor again? What's his family again? What has he done for the roads? What's the budget? Something like that. Put that out there. Let people be able to access it, and make sure it's safe for the people reporting the information and also for the people accessing it. Because ultimately, if we take all of the layers of the onion off the complexity of the problem, it's just people not doing their jobs properly. It's people that have thunk themselves into a rapacious situation. And that's bad for them, that's bad for society, unless society can identify them and replace them with true stewards. All of a sudden, oh, there's a public garden that looked like crap, trash thrown everywhere, broken lights, drug needles, all that. But then they got a new police force and also a new city public works department. 1 year later, it looks like a paradise. The fountain is working. You've got new landscape design. You've got new furniture. You've got everything, new vegetation, everything. Night and day difference. So it's just that simple. The people that are occupying the position aren't qualified and they need to be changed out. The only thing stopping that process is the political will, but what's also an aggravating process is not knowing what's happening and the correlation between why things have also gone wrong socially and how not to repeat those mistakes in the future or anywhere. And if those mistakes were made, how do you unravel those mistakes in the quickest, most civilized, and painless way imaginable? Which is not a life of self-flagellation or self-blame or denial. It's just, this is what works, we're going with that, and we're not really going to have to explain every time to every person that isn't 100% on board with it why it works better. What were they doing 500 years ago? Life is always a battle. It's never going to end. There's just different periods, different players, different plays. And this time around, it's looking better. But why is it looking better? Because the West didn't fall apart like everybody predicted, or at least not yet. In some ways, it is still falling apart, but in some ways, it's not. Some ways, it's coming together in better ways. Such as in feedback culture, getting rid of, just entertaining the idea that we need completely new structures and we need to start taking the socioeconomic and political side of things much more seriously. We cannot delegate that out. The people that are applying negative sociology via these mechanisms, these holding companies for stock transactions and what have you, that is the scale of negativity that encompasses is hard to really calculate, and therefore it should be looked at with a lot more severity. This isn't just a business decision to impose sociological principles that aren't congruent with the way things usually or can not usually work, but most likely don't work. Such as politicizing the workplace. It's just known stupidity. And that's what they're doing, just trying to put it in some type of a capitalist packaging. Which brings me back to not accepting things on face value. Hell no. Or not where it's coming from. Oh, this is coming from a big law firm. This must be a good law. Nope. It's not how it works. Doesn't really matter what the hell of a law firm they are. Look at what they're proposing. It's ridiculous. It's some lobby paid them to do it. It compromises national security, compromises cultural security, compromises the strategic direction of the country. Hell no. That should not be considered trivial if they propose something like that. Companies that are paid by actors like that and don't have a problem to exert influence like that, I think that should be considered something more severe. Something that should perhaps get them disbarred. That would be a disbarring offense. So that would also change the culture where you say, look, guess what? No, this is not, we're not in this world where people have these blinders on anymore. You propose bad law, you're going to get disbarred. Like, you will never work again. You don't have the moral values. You don't have the loyalties. And so it needs to be consequential, much more consequential. Freeze the assets, yeah, maybe something like that. I mean, if it certainly now, in order to turn things around, there needs to be a little bit more done in these fields. And it can't be just, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. This is the other thing. Complaining culture is no. There's a difference between feedback culture and complaining culture. Complaining culture is just negative. And a lot of people don't know how to differentiate it. Like, oh, here I am complaining about the weather again. Like, you know these types of dopey people. Everybody stops listening to them after a while. Because it's just gloom and doom. So no, it's not a complaining culture, it's a feedback culture. And it's also a suggestive culture. So, okay, this is what's happening. As disturbing and childish and foolish and retarded it is, and also as malicious as it is, as a military type of thing. And B, the most effective means for shutting it down. That's not a complaining culture. See, that's something that's transformed itself into a proactive culture. Positive, proactive culture. And worldwide also, I have to say, it's sort of like a reverse globalism within the context of globalism that takes human realities on the ground into account, which is to say it's much more practical, like the results really do speak for my side of the equation, whereas people who think what I'm trying to do is hateful are actually the hateful people type thing, where you can say that in public and you know you're right, and it really doesn't matter what they say or what poison frames they can put on top of that, they're wrong. That's a different culture than complaining culture, or a whining culture. Whining culture is even worse. Everything's terrible, it's never gonna get better, there's nothing to, we're just gonna all be destroyed by zombies or this or that. That's not appropriate either. Conduct yourself with right effort. It's always a good thing to return to optimism, because in reality we only have 2 minutes to live. So there is no doomed future for us. I see a triumphant one. And so should you. If you feel yourself getting down in the dumps or depressed or worked up about this or that, let it go. Drop it. Cognition itself is causally linked to outcome. Bad thoughts lead to bad outcomes. Internally first. That's where a whole lot more attention needs to be brought in the Western mind. Because that's where the whole magic happens. Dissatisfaction versus neutrality. If you can do it there, but to get there you have to know it exists, and then you need to know how to get there. So that you can at least bring yourself to a state of neutrality, which means non-agitation. You've let go of the defilements, and then you can reset with looking at things differently, looking at it in a comical way instead of a tragic way, just for a split second. Just as a role-playing exercise, you put yourself into the position of a person who could possibly see your troubles, your agitations in a different way, and perhaps in a humorous way, or perhaps in a ridiculous way that also combines out-of-controlness and change and all those other different things like entropy and big concepts that are true and also true in our lives. Certain things fall apart because they can't hold together anymore because maybe there's an earthquake, the steel beams can't keep things together. So it's really rare when there's great structures and great people in them all working together in a wholesome way that is both productive and self-evident, that the exercise itself is the exercise in civic virtues. And there are virtuous people out there. That's the thing. Look to those people a little bit more. Don't forget about them so easily by going on a tirade about someone you don't like. Look to the good people. What do they need? Drop the the aggravation towards other parties. Other parties have enough aggravations amongst their own groups. If you look at how rowdy families are and then you multiply that up by the thousands, millions, how rowdy can a country be from one time to another? And for what reasons or what bad reasons do people do things, or where are they incentivized and all of that? That's part of the sociological concept, and that's something that has been misused, and it certainly needs new architecture. Again, just like an old soggy boat that's sinking, and tow it to the nearest dry dock or shipbuilding facility, and then salvage what you want from it, or perhaps, again, put it out to pasture. Perhaps you could use a reef or some type of blockage for some type of reason. Maybe a flood protection, wind protection, something like that. You can do it. You can segue like that. Now, ships of state really can't do it that gracefully themselves, but the option is there that ships of state can mess themselves up, but they can also reform themselves. That possibility is true, and the thought of it alone should motivate you to do more good, because there's a lot of good to be done, has been done, and will be done by people, good people that will make it happen, because making it happen is good. Here's also a wholesome concept. It's also a compassionate concept about so-called enemies. Just imagine two men that are wearing two inverted goggles and then hitting each other. That's really the equivalent of what men do. But if you can remove the goggles, and you can also decease with any type of fighting. Why? Not in the vicinity of anyone, not doing no one no harm in no way, except speaking the truth. Well, I wonder what type of people wouldn't benefit from that. I guess it would be the bad people that don't benefit from the truth. Who can help that? In every dirty, dumb age, there's these type of dirty, dumb people. It's just sometimes they have more impunity than others. The best times are when they have none, and perhaps aren't there in large numbers for some lucky reason. But that's not all places at all times. It can't be. How could it be? How could it be that there are places so enchanting and magical, and yet other places that are totally the opposite of that. And yet, on what level are we making comparisons again? What type of comparisons are we making? Are we making fantastic comparisons? Like this is a fantastic concept of what was there and who was there and what happened, and it's all not true. It's some type of manipulated narrative that people told you for their own reasons that mattered to them, but they didn't, whatever else beyond that, within their time, it never occurred to them what some of the secondary side effects of their stupidities were. And so you can't even blame them in that case, which is why looking to the past for blame is not wise. So there's really nothing to be found there except abstract reasons for enraging yourself. When was that skillful? That's like getting mad about a phone call that never happened. So why would you engage in such an academic exercise? That's not what professor would say. That's, hey kid, you're really doing the right thing by doing that. Rather than say, look, dispense with that and get to other things. If it has to be neutrality for some time, then ponder neutrality instead. Because then you're not wasting your time with agitation. So is that good? Okay, if that is good, ergo it is good, ergo the process is good, ergo the results are good. Aggravating things or not aggravating things, that is the question. And catching yourself when you're engaging in agitating things or agitating yourself unnecessarily and stopping it right there. That's the cure for mental acne in the form of agitations and irritations and insults and anything else that you could work yourself up about. Something from the past, something from the future. And then I couldn't believe that, like all this weird causality up in your brain, like causing some type of commotion. That's normal, but the alternative to that, which is none of that, that's really, really, really good for you and others. Because from that state, you are a vital force. A vital force for good. Because you were generous enough to yourself to be compassionate. I say this all the time, but many people don't seem to know why it makes sense. I think it's a good idea for every modern person to do some reflection on what their trigger words are, like what triggers you emotionally, especially if it's some type of political term. For example, socialism. Like, what do you understand under that word again? Like, is it only good things? Because maybe that's just one side of the story. I think when we're talking about the psychological treatment of people who have been damaged by these types of political programs, which is to say en masse, you have to develop sort of a compassionate strategy of realizing that they have been completely misinformed on most of the fundamental issues of history, let alone the economy or politics. So we have a certain class of people that think that they're in a position to make political statements using jargonistic terms, but by using those jargonistic terms, and those jargonistic terms being attached to emotions such as agitation or ill will, in some instances, but then goodness and everything being right with other instances, and then just realized that because of the nature of your systems, which are not free, that your version of the past your version of past events most likely is not true. Now, this can come as somewhat of a shocker to some people, like this really flips their lids, but don't let it do that, or let it do that, but don't see it as anything more than something that's possible within this wacky world of ours. It's possible. It's been done. I'm sure Genghis Khan did it. It actually is something that happens par for the course in Asiatic societies. Like the top man, the top despot, the king, the emperor, however you want to call him, he creates reality. He creates the history. He formalizes it. Nobody else is writing books. If they are, they have a reason, economic reason for doing so. They're not super curious, except outside of the universities, and there they have directions usually on what to write, or if there's an eccentric interest of the emperor in a certain period, perhaps they will investigate certain things, such as porcelain. And in other ages, they'll let that go and pick up dialectic materialism or some such thing. Now, what's very unfortunate for China and subsequently Southeast Asia, specifically Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos, but also Burma, is that these programs have seen extensive activity and in many cases have radicalized the political and historical landscapes. How could it be any different? They don't even say, they don't even claim that that's something they wouldn't do. That's actually something they say they would do because they see history and materialism and everything. It's a reverse Hegelianism or Hegelian system. So for philosophers, of course, we have a lot more optionality. We can say, okay, this is this system. We can classify this system. But we can also see the limitations of it. On the other hand, then you have the capitalist system. See, if you get into this sort of false dilemma that there's only two systems, then it's easy to get pushed into taking a side. When in fact, these are just sort of stupefying concepts, and intentionally so. There's no reason to get worked up about one or the other. It's a good idea to let both concepts go. Because you notice when you start seeing dichotomies like that, you should already realize or get a sense that you're dealing with a manipulated framework. It's constructionist. This or that, that's it. Two choices. And nothing else exists. So go. And both choices sort of work for them in some way. Just for this, from the standpoint of politics. So you could look at it as neutrally as that. So if you put anything extra on top of that, if you really are invested egoically in one side or another, you're really just getting caught up in things you would have been much better off avoiding entirely. If we go back to the Stone Age, these problems aren't problems. Other problems, the weather's the problem. The sun has been missing for the last 3 days. It's been raining. That's sort of a big problem, especially if you wanted to do some farming, unless you have the right equipment to work in the rain. Like maybe you have a wide-brimmed hat. Maybe it's people have gotten used to rice farming in Vietnam and know how to handle it. And they did that for many hundreds and thousands of years. So today, I think it's very easy to get caught up on jargon. And it's a very simple emotional hook to combine some type of tragedy or trauma to politically implement jargonistic slogans or concepts or ideas that can keep you locked in to a structure that is not beneficial because it is rigged. It's not free. It's a causality is created that is more or less inevitable once you accept the causality and you connect these emotional memories that you have, for example, losing a loved one. But in fact, if you put that in the context of out of controlness and impermanence and change and all these other crazy things that can happen for crazy reasons, then it does make some sort of sense in the truthful sense and not in a political sense. And so this is a very big strength, especially in times of crazy politics, to be able to withdraw on a subjective level, on a cognitive level, on a personal level, is very important and very beneficial for any practitioner that practices it, because it reduces agitation so you know you're going in the right way. So greed, ill will, delusion. Delusion is this disinformation. People are trying to create illusions. They're trying to create deceptions. But there's also a big self-deception. There's external and internal deceptions. And so you need to be able to let both of them go to be free. Now the self-deception, what did the Buddha say? He said, no self. How can you deceive a self that's not there? We're mostly deceived by the self because we formulated the self to see things in a specific way. But why do you see it that way? Well, because it's me, it's mine. I've been told this is how I should think. Well, is that the only way to think about it? What is a loss after you've lost and then you forgot about it or you learned something? Is it a loss? Materialists are too afraid of losing things and too aggressive about getting things, especially things that don't belong to them, but they feel like their system as a lawnmower can just go out there and chop heads and take what it wants because it's so perfectly symmetric and so perfectly autonomous. But is getting more things, especially that way, skillful or not? When looked at from the standpoint of pure neutrality, what do you gain by taking things and causing violence? So I'm really glad to hear that there's some distance in all types of far-off lands. I think the West needs to distance itself from its concepts of capitalism, and the East needs to distance itself from the concepts of dialectic materialism, and certainly Leninism. And if you were fooled by those movements, forgive yourself. They're very convincing. They do present only certain facts. It's like a form of, I'm not banging or busting on the Jehovah's Witnesses, but every religion more or less that is proselytizing has some type of sales pitch to it. And it was built on religious models. It also incorporates religion into it. It's more of a psychological revolution. Sociological, psychological, economic. There's a couple of different levels to it. But the good news is you can find your way back. You can let that stuff go. It's like you had this complicated machine that every time you revved it up, it made a lot of noise and clunked around, but you can put the machine down and never pick it up again and just walk away free. And it doesn't matter how much time you think and how much self you have invested. It's not there. It's an illusion. This moment of liberation can last a lifetime if you devote yourself skillfully to the practice. How could it not be true? If you can leave everything else behind, why not that? It would be so much better for you and the world. So much richer, so much more generous, so much more compassionate. So much more well-ordered. And yet, not everything can be well-ordered. If we're a perfectionist, if we're always looking at the places where things are falling apart and not asking the questions, why? Then we cannot know, we cannot understand. It's really foolish to think we can understand the complexities of the issues on the ground. Why certain people don't like certain people. On the other hand, we know that giving up ill will and aggravation is very skillful. But it does take, in many cases, two sides to do it. One side might do it quicker than the other side. If the other side gives up aggravation quicker than the other side wins. But they both win, long term. Living without aggravation and without greed. And without delusion. Delusion is what brings us to greed and to aggravation again and again and again. But we can let it go again and again and again as well. But one thing I know is people making mistakes, you can't stop people from making their own mistakes. And for them, what's a mistake if it's a learning process? If they don't survive this time around, this life, then perhaps in the next life. But what they will be, if they will be in a position, an advantageous position to learn how to put themselves on the ascending trajectory or not, that is unknown. Perhaps their descendant trajectory will take them to places that may never return to this human realm. And there's a causality to that is unbreakable. You can't change it for them. But you could be persuasive at the right moment, in the right way, at the right time. Returning again to Russia, because I heard someone say that he thinks it's inevitable that Russia will remain imperialistic. I don't think any country is predestined to be something that we affix this label imperialist to. On the other hand, it's a matter of debate. What type of imperialism where and for what reasons? What is to be gained by imperialism? I like simplifying things whenever it's possible. If you think of a country like a house and the countries around your house as your neighbors, then why would you want to go into the house of your neighbor and exert influence? Or exert influence over the area in which your neighbor lives? Unless you're a very paranoid person. Imagine just having a neighbor like that. You could write an entire comedy called The Paranoid Neighbor that comes out as you're 7 in the morning or whenever you go out with your dog. He's sitting there with some binoculars, watching you and noting when you exited the building what you were doing. Then you go back in, and he notes when you went back in. It's these types of actions do speak of a way of seeing the world that isn't very friendly or beneficial, and it's actually rather ridiculous if you get right down to it. Especially when one's own house is so full of junk and things not working properly. Like, why can't there be happy, prosperous, well-managed cities in all of Russia? Like, why not? Why hasn't that happened? Or what is stopping that from happening? Maybe we need to ask the Vietnamese. Maybe they could give their analysis how social conditions without sanctions cause Russia to fall into its doldrums that it's in today. And whether there's also some political criticisms that one could make. For example, how about secession? What about a secession plan? When you have these personality cults of leaders, in some case, it would be quite interesting to know how the secession took place between it's always a big question. Now, I guess you could say in China and Vietnam, they've maintained their political party, so that would make it possible, but Russia did away with theirs. So how will that go this next time around? And is that not a big weakness and something to be avoided? But avoided altogether, in that one does not go down that path of one big manism. So I understand there's a certain amount of efficiency involved with one manism, but what you win in efficiency, you lose long term, because it's essentially just a bad management strategy. So it's a bad management practice. So imagine I'm talking about forestry, and I'm saying if you clear cut the forest and then go with tractors and rip up all the stumps, and you do nothing to the ground, that there's a very high probability that land will not be fertile for potentially ever, at least from the standpoint of forestry. Now, there might be things that grow there, like grasses, or it might remain a moonscape depending on the climate. Desertification could set in. There's so many different variations. But let's just say from the standpoint of forestry that it's a suboptimal outcome. Then we could just clearly talk about things on a scientific level, and politics does not get involved. So when I'm talking about a secession plan, you can personally apply it to the Russian situation, but in effect you could apply it to all governing bodies, and then we're in the realm of philosophy, which is a great place to be, because it doesn't matter to anyone. Nobody listens, and very few people understand. And it doesn't have to be funny. See, comedy has to be funny. Philosophy just should be wise. But just should be wise is not such a small thing. Response I got back was, some of your words are much too harsh. Your criticisms are so obliterating that there's no hope for those that hear such a criticism and then still try to maintain the farce of being engaged in the arts. And so could you speak more mildly and plainly on this topic? And I wrote back, I said, it's not a big deal. It's just a bad performance. You walk into a theater, you could have the best actors, best stage, best building, even best audience. And for some reason, perhaps it's out of controlness and impermanence and a bunch of other factors that are always with us. It's a flop. It falls dead flat. Every line is missed. It's okay without any extra agitation to just say, it didn't work out this time. So throw it all away, or at least the parts that didn't work, and come back with some new stuff. For example, the format, I like that. 5 speakers, 8 minutes. And then maybe based on the results of a unbiased jury, the people could decide what act expands. So maybe the one speaker who had on fire 8 minutes because the crowd wanted to hear more of them. Next time they get maybe 16 minutes. They get double the time. So it's then a new round with people. So maybe it's then 3 people of 16 minutes each, or 2 people of 16 minutes. And then based on who wins that one, they get graduated to 30 minutes. And then you'd have like a set of speakers that are at 30 minutes and plus, and then the people nobody knows about that are down at 8 or maybe even 4 minutes. And give them 2 minutes and see what comes back. That might be a way of curating talent as far as the arts go, or in academic, sort of a open source academia type world where we share more than we take from others. In fact, we don't take anything from others. We give back trillions more. Also, as for the imposters that were engaging in the representation of at least academic inquiry into the arts, those types of charlatans, it's best that they go, and they go when they're exposed to such. You pointed out, look, this restaurant, they say they serve burritos. They can't even boil spaghetti. It's either true or it isn't. But if it's true, then people should know. So, and it just does keep people from wasting their time. So ultimately, it is a beneficial practice, despite the aims and objectives of the imposters. And they also have an opportunity to learn from the experience that it is possible that charlatans would be exposed, and the results of that or something that one could avoid if one were wise, and if one has now realized that it's unwise to be a charlatan, then you can stop being one. And so it's a great gift to charlatans too. And finally, you could say, well, it wasn't just a bad performance this night. It might last a week, a month, a year, until finally reality sets in and the landscape either turns into a desert and evaporates, or it gets replaced with something good instead of something bad. So these are matters that aren't really under one's control. Not even the greatest dictator in the world can dictate all of these things necessarily, especially when he's not paying attention to them or have a taste or understanding for the things that he may or may not fat finger, as they say. So there's that aspect as well. And as for my expectation to be entertained only by the best of art, isn't that a rather foolish expectation to have? Why is great art so prized? Because it's so rare. It is rare. And why is it rare? Because it requires skill. And why is skill rare? Because it requires practice. Not just, oh, it's raining outside, or oh, the snow is falling. No archery for me today. No, that is the condition. If archery is necessary, if it's not, well, all the better for you, isn't it?